What would happen if Patrick Jane, the fake psychic turned genius consultant from The Mentalist, ever got assigned to hunt down Walter White, the mild-mannered chemistry teacher turned meth kingpin from Breaking Bad? On paper, this almost feels unfair. One of these guys reads a room in about 4 seconds and picks apart a liar without raising his voice. The other one built a billion-dollar drug empire while still making it home in time for dinner. But stack them up against each other. And in my opinion, this is actually one of the most brutal psychological matchups you could build. Because Walter White isn't just a criminal hiding a secret. He's a man who has convinced himself his lies are true. And that, as we're about to get into, might be the one thing that could actually slow Jane down. So, let's start by breaking down why Jane is so dangerous in the first place. Because his whole method only makes sense once you understand where it came from. Part 1. Patrick Jane's method. Before Jane became a consultant for the California Bureau of Investigation, he spent years as a fake psychic, running cold readings on grieving families who just wanted someone to tell them their loved ones were at peace. That backstory matters more than people give it credit for, because it means Jane's entire skill set was built on reading people, not on forensics, not on procedure, and not on physical evidence. After his wife and daughter were murdered by the serial killer Red John, Jane dropped the psychic act and turned every one of those manipulation skills towards something closer to justice. His method relies on catching micro-expressions, the flickers on someone's face that last less than a second, and reveal what they're actually feeling underneath whatever they're saying out loud. He picks up on vocal tone shifts, timing, word choice, and the specific kind of over-explaining that guilty people can't help but do. And Jane isn't afraid to bend the truth himself during interrogations, using suggestion techniques that get uncomfortably close to hypnosis to get someone to slip. The thing that separates Jane from basically every other fictional detective is that he forms his conclusion about a person's guilt first, based purely on how they react to him, and then goes looking for evidence to justify it afterward. That's backwards from how real investigations work. But it's terrifyingly effective when the person doing it happens to be right almost every single time. Part 2. Walter White's method. Now, let's flip over to Walter White, because his advantages work in a completely different way, and honestly, they might be more dangerous than anything Jane has faced before. Walter starts the show as a high school chemistry teacher, a man so unremarkable that people talk over him at his own birthday party. That ordinariness isn't a weakness. It's camouflage. Nobody suspects the guy who clips coupons and drives a beat-up sedan of running a drug empire, and Walter understands that better than almost anyone. Underneath the mild-mannered exterior, he's building one of the most sophisticated meth operations in the country, using his genuine chemistry expertise to manufacture products so pure it becomes recognizable by color alone. But here's what actually makes Walter dangerous in a way Jane hasn't dealt with before. Walter doesn't think of himself as a liar over time. He genuinely convinces himself that everything he's doing is justified, that he's protecting his family, that circumstances forced his hand, that he never had a choice. He builds an entire internal narrative where he's the reluctant hero of his own story instead of the villain, and that matters enormously against someone like Jane, because Jane's whole method depends on finding the gap between what someone says and what they actually believe. Walter has spent years closing that gap by rewriting what he believes to match what he says. He's not performing innocence in his own mind. A huge part of him actually feels innocent. That's exactly where things get interesting. Part 3. The setup. So let's build the scenario. Say a string of unusual poisoning and disappearance cases starts crossing state lines into California. Cases that don't fit the usual cartel or gang patterns the DEA is used to seeing. The purity levels are too clean, the distribution too careful, the whole operation too disciplined to be some low-level dealer. It gets kicked over to the CBI as a consulting case. And Jane gets pulled in. Now he's walking through evidence rooms and case files before he even has a name attached to the operation. Jane doesn't start by suspecting a chemistry teacher specifically, because nothing about the initial profile screams suburban dad. Instead, he reads the entire case the way he reads a room, looking for the places where the official story doesn't quite hang together. A missing persons report that got closed too fast, a witness who suddenly stopped cooperating, a car wash owner with cash flow that doesn't match his foot traffic. Eventually, that trail leads to Walter White. And this is where the real problem starts, because the moment Jane sits down across from him, Jane's whole method kicks into gear. Part 4. The interrogation problem. Here's the thing about Jane that makes him so effective against normal suspects. He doesn't walk in and interrogate people outright. He starts casual conversations that feel completely harmless on the surface, while quietly testing the person the entire time without them realizing it's happening. He'll provoke a little, plant a suggestion, watch how someone reacts under pressure they don't even know they're under. Against a normal person, this works almost every time, because normal people leak small cracks in their composure without meaning to. But Walter isn't reacting like a normal suspect. And it's not because he's emotionless like some kind of sociopath. It's because Walter has genuinely rehearsed his own justification so many times that the lie feels true when it comes out of his mouth. When Jane goes fishing for a guilty flinch, he might actually find something that looks like righteous frustration instead. A man who seems legitimately insulted at being questioned, because in Walter's head, he's not the bad guy in this story. That's a strange kind of camouflage. Jane is used to peeling back a performance to find the real emotion underneath. But what happens when the performance and the real emotion have started to merge? Jane would likely walk away from that first conversation not with certainty, but with something more unsettling, the sense that something is off, without being able to name exactly what. Part 5. Digging into the past. Once Jane clocks that something doesn't sit right, his instincts would push him towards the timeline instead of the man in front of him. And this is exactly where Walter's story becomes impossible to hold together under close inspection. Walter's transformation didn't happen overnight. There's a starting point, a cancer diagnosis, a sudden shift in finances, a change in relationships with the people closest to him, a business partner who got unusually wealthy, unusually fast. Jane has a track record of sniffing out stories that got wrapped up too conveniently. And Walter's life is full of convenient explanations that don't survive a second look. A gambling win that doesn't match his spending habits. A consulting arrangement that nobody can quite explain. A former student who suddenly can't be reached. Jane wouldn't need long to start connecting these dots, probably faster than any law enforcement officer working through normal channels. Because Jane isn't constrained by warrants, procedure, or probable cause. He's constrained by nothing except his own curiosity, which, in this case, is a serious problem for Walter. Part 6. Knowing versus proving. Here's where I think a lot of people would get this matchup wrong. Because knowing something and proving something are two completely different battles. Jane might land on the correct suspicion fairly quickly, maybe within the first couple of weeks of actually paying close attention. But building a case that would hold up against Walter White is an entirely different fight. Because Walter isn't a lucky criminal who's stumbled into getting away with things. He's a former chemistry teacher who has spent years thinking several steps ahead of a nosy neighbor, a DEA agent brother-in-law, and a business partner smart enough to want out. He's used to being underestimated, and he's used to using that underestimation as a weapon. Walter also has something Jane's usual suspects don't: a genuine understanding of chain of custody, chemical trace evidence, and exactly how thorough forensic teams need to be before they can make an arrest stick. He's spent an entire second life thinking about exactly how to avoid leaving the kind of evidence that survives a courtroom. Against a normal detective following normal procedure, that knowledge is an enormous advantage. But Jane isn't playing by normal procedure either, and that's what makes this such an even fight. Jane doesn't need airtight evidence to be personally convinced of something. Once his certainty locks in, he becomes relentless about proving it by any means necessary, even methods that cross legal lines other investigators wouldn't touch. Part 7. The standoff. This creates a genuinely tense dynamic where both men would essentially be studying each other from a distance. Walter, increasingly paranoid about the consultant who keeps circling back with oddly specific questions. Jane, increasingly convinced he's found something real, but frustrated that the story keeps slipping through his fingers every time he tries to pin it down. That kind of standoff never lasts forever, though, especially not with someone like Walter involved, because Walter doesn't handle threats to his empire quietly. He handles them by removing them. And this raises a real problem for Jane specifically. If Jane gets too close to the truth, Walter wouldn't just wait around to be arrested. Jane fits into a category of person Walter has dealt with before. Someone dangerously close to exposing him. And Walter has proven, over and over, that he'll cross moral lines he once thought were unthinkable. The moment his freedom or his empire is actually on the line, whether that means intimidation, manipulation, or something far more permanent depends on how cornered he feels. And here's where things get risky for Jane. His entire skill set lives in his head, not in his hands. He's a master of reading people and steering conversations. But he's never been built for a direct physical confrontation. And he's definitely never gone up against someone with access to poisons, chemical knowledge, and a network of people willing to make problems disappear. If Walter White ever decided Jane was a loose end that needed cutting, that encounter would not favor Jane at all. That's exactly why Jane's entire strategy would have to revolve around never letting things get that far, using distance, misdirection, and other people as a buffer, instead of ever confronting Walter alone. Part 8. Jane's actual plan. So let's get into the part I think would be the most satisfying to watch play out. How Jane would actually try to catch Walter without ever putting himself in the kind of danger Walter is capable of creating. Knowing Jane's style from the show, I don't think he'd go after the old evidence directly, since Walter has had years to bury it. Instead, Jane would try to create a situation that forces Walter to make a mistake in the present. He'd start by identifying a piece of Walter's current operation that's still vulnerable: a supplier, a distributor, a loose thread in the business that Walter thinks is buttoned up. Then, without ever tipping his hand directly to Walter, Jane would make sure that thread starts to unravel in a way that looks like bad luck rather than an investigation. Jane wouldn't force a confrontation. He'd let pressure and paranoia do the heavy lifting, because he understands something important about people like Walter. A man who has spent years controlling every variable in his empire is not going to sit calmly while pieces of it start falling apart around him. Walter would start making decisions out of panic instead of precision. And panic is exactly the kind of crack Jane knows how to exploit. Once that pressure is applied, Jane's real move would be surveillance, not confrontation. He'd quietly watch how Walter reacts to the unraveling, treating the whole thing as routine monitoring of a broader operation rather than a trap aimed specifically at Walter. This keeps Jane completely insulated. If nothing happens, nobody ever knows the setup existed at all. But if Walter reacts the way a cornered man reacts, making a call he shouldn't make, meeting someone he shouldn't meet, that's the moment Jane would be there to see it happen. Jane's whole goal wouldn't be proving what Walter did years ago. It would be proving what Walter is doing right now. Because present tense evidence, caught in real time, is infinitely easier to build a case around than years of buried mistakes. Part 9. How long would it actually take? So, realistically, I don't think this game would resolve quickly, and honestly. That's what makes it such a compelling standoff in the first place. Jane has an almost supernatural talent for figuring out the truth about people. Walter has an almost supernatural talent for convincing himself and everyone around him that the truth doesn't apply to him. Put those two abilities against each other, and you get a slow burn instead of a quick knockout. My honest guess is that Jane would land on the correct suspicion within the first 2 to 3 weeks. Faster than usual, actually, because Walter's paper trail is messier than he thinks it is, but building something solid enough to move on, especially against someone this careful and this willing to escalate, would probably take a couple of months at minimum. And during all of that time, Walter would be doing exactly what he's always done best: adapting, covering his tracks, and trying to figure out exactly how much Jane actually knows before deciding whether Jane becomes a problem that needs to be permanently solved. Part 10. The verdict. So bringing all of this together, in my opinion, Jane wins the psychological red almost every time, because that's simply the game he was built for. But Walter's biggest defense has always been that he doesn't just lie to other people, he lies to himself first. And that makes the usual cracks. Jane looks for, much harder to find, winning the psychological battle and winning outright, though, are two very different outcomes. If this situation ever tips into physical danger, Jane would be in serious trouble, because reading people brilliantly doesn't protect you from someone who has access to poison, chemistry, and people willing to make problems vanish. Jane's only real path to victory is staying several steps ahead the entire time, and never letting Walter corner him. If I had to put a number on it, I'd guess Jane figures out the truth within about 2 to 3 weeks. But actually building a case strong enough to bring Walter down safely would take somewhere around 2 to 3 months, assuming absolutely nothing goes wrong along the way. And with Walter White, something always goes wrong. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know in the comments which crossover you want to see next. Hit subscribe, because there's a lot more of these matchups coming.